Welcome to the Motor Carriers Insurance Education Transportation Risk Specialist Truck Stop Webinar, presented every second Thursday of the month at 2 p.m. These webinars are industry updates and do not provide state CE credit. If you're interested in the webinars that do provide state CE credit, please contact our office. If during the program you have some difficulty or have a question, type those questions in the chat window, and Scott or I'll introduce Scott later, will attempt to answer them during the presentation. If not, we'll follow it up with an email. If for some reason you have a problem with this presentation, meaning audio, or you lose it, you can type in the chat window if you still have it available to you on your computer. If not, call our office, 800-741-4084, and we'll we'll attempt to correct the problems. This webinar will be posted on our website the week after the presentation, so you'll be able to review it later and listen to the presentation in case you have missed it here, something happens during the program and you can't hear and you can't stay with us the whole time, or you want to share this with someone else. Back to the future, or at least a little way back. FAST removed the CSA scores on the alerts, meaning they took down the triangles. They're not available anymore for public view based on the law. We have said often and have included in the Motor Carriers Insurance Education Foundation presentations, face-to-face blogs, webinars, or even annual conference, that the insurance provider should look beyond the triangles, beyond the alerts, because the detail is the important part of this. FAST said Congress passed and FAST stands for the Fixing American Surface Transportation Act. There's a strong commitment to safety as the last part of that commitment, or the objective stated by Congress. This stated purposes is the part of that affects us, the insurance provider. In the past 2 years or so, Congress has questioned the FMCSA new rules and regulations and what they're doing to our motor carriers. They're balancing safety with what it costs in operational costs. Congress has heard that CSA and SMS is not fair and not a true measurement of an unsafe trucker, or at least a crash predictor, which is what we're interested in the insurance industry. FMCSA says it is, and will keep moving forward with the improvements. The insurance industry considers CSA scores when underwriting, particularly for small motor carriers. CSA scores, a quick measure to use to deny or move forward with a risk. CSA scores affect settlements and claims. CSA scores have been an area of discussion with retail agents have with motor carriers. This is what we have done. When a threshold is exceeded, the motor carrier receives a warning letter that says a review of your safety data shows a lack of compliance and safety performance has fallen to an unacceptable letter. We're concerned about this as an insurance industry if the insurer does not take appropriate action to improve this, because we're worried about this selling up in court. This is a problem here. And we encourage the agents to help the insured when they get to the threshold or shortly thereafter, so that they can address the warning letter. Recommendation says that we encourage you to take this warning letter seriously and improve your safety record. And we have been talking often about the responsibility that we feel for retail agents who are writing this area of insurance to help the insured with their safety scores. Agents, what do you do when you are aware that the letter is coming? You need to visit your insured and help them improve. How many insurance providers look at the alerts, the triangles, as part of the underwriting process? Some have written or have unwritten rules that say 2 triangles and or 2 alerts and we will not write. Why? It saves time. It just doesn't meet their model. And again, the insurance industry is attempting to model this to save time to determine what risks are worth them investing their assets and time in writing. By the way, these are put in safety event groups. We've discussed often that safety event groups is a peer measurement. It's not necessarily a reflection of the individual risk. So when the FAST Act was passed, it required in the Act that the administrator, the FMCSA administrator, shall commission the National Research Council to do a study. And the study should include, under B, the scope of it, to verify the accuracy for which the behavior analysis and safety improvement categories identify risk carriers and are a predictor or correlation with future crash risk. This is where we have argued often. The industry experts that we have talked about argued often, our friends with American Transportation Research Institute has often argued that these are really not a measurement of safety. So the FMCSA is now commanded by Congress to do this study. This study has to be completed in 18 months. And so during that completion 18 months, they will look at this and they will have to have a report back. That's 18 months after December 2018. So the first provision of the FAST Act is an improvement of the CSA methodology to prove that there is a correlation between what they're publishing in the alerts and the scores and crashes, or future crashes on individual motor carriers. The second part of this, as we all were aware of, is that the scores were commanded to be hidden. They were commanded to be hidden the day after the law was passed. So the analysis, the percentage, the scores would not be available to anybody but the inspector, anybody but the enforcement officers until this study is done and for the 18 months and finished, and the verification that these scores do have a relevance with the crash predictors. So to keep abreast of this, since the industry has become dependent on this, these scores are still available to us who are willing to go through a third party. They have ability to estimate or calculate the scores, and they're looking at a success rate of about 98 to 99% of the scores being accurate. They will provide means to monitor to keep track of the motor carrier safety. Using roadside inspection and violation data, approximating CSA scores can be calculated, and calculating scores are still available. How they do this, these third-party providers have access to all the raw data, and they have computer experts who can write the formulas out and come up with the scores. So they have access to that area, so they're still there. Are they exact? Not really, but they're very close. Again, the success rate we're hearing is in the high 90, 98, 99 percentile or percentage of actually scores. The third party still allows us to save time, and it still allows us to, because time does cost money, and so the retail agents can access these too. Most of your insurance carriers have a relationship with the Central Analysis Bureau, which allows your underwriters to look at these scores still. Carrier softwares are a provider for some motor carriers, but a lot of retail agents use them to asset the scores, so they're still available. Steve Bryant, who Visilo, has their own formula that shows these scores. So these members are part of our Motor Carrier Insurance Education Foundation, and if you're interested in how they are still providing those, these are their websites, and I encourage you to contact them. Let's talk about what we're here today. So when FAST passed, the CSA basic alerts were no longer available for the public. The insurance industry lost a tool they have been used since the implementation of CSA December 12, 2010. Now what do we have? The raw data came back up. Also part of the FAST said that the continued public availability of data, this is what the FAST Act still allows. The scores and the triangles are not available. But here is what is, notwithstanding any other provision of this section, inspection and violation information submitted to the FMCSA administrator by commercial motor vehicle inspectors and qualified law enforcement officers out of service rates and absolute measurement shall remain available to the public. That's the key word here. Absolute measurement shall remain available to the public. So last week, the industry was informed through sources and other things and we'll see it later with the new scores. And I'm just quoting two headlines and two journals that are two sources of information I keep track of, CCJ Digest, that was in headlines on 2/22/2016, or Overdrive, also the same time frame, 2/26/2016, has published it. And I recommend you all hooking up to both of these informational sources. They'll keep you informed of what's happening on a daily basis. The headline says, and the article follows it, FMCSA plans to return to public view some CSA scores, despises Congress requirement to revamp the program. The scores that they're going to publish, as you find in Overdrive magazine, or Overdrive said, absolute measurement scores will be returned to the public in the next update, which is projected to be this month. So the previous slide said that the FMCSA, excuse me, the FAST Act does allow FMCSA to do this. But what are absolute measurements? This is why we're here today. So anytime I have a question about technical thing, I go to the go-to person that knows it all, or at least knows a lot, Scott Murray. He's a dear friend and has been interested in this industry a lot. And so he's going to be with me in the rest of this program, and a little later, and we'll have him tune in on the rest that he has here. So I went there. And talking to him in our first talk, he reminded me that this information has always been available before the CSA basic alerts were ever taken down. I just did not look at it. I didn't look at what the absolute measurement. Why? Really? Because I didn't understand it. I asked him if he would help me and our FMCSA, our Motor Carriers Insurance Education members, to understand, and he said yes. So, Scott, at least say hello to everybody.
Hey, Tommy, thanks for allowing us to be with you. Since they popped this out, FMCSA, saying they were going to release scores, the only thing anybody is listening is CSA scores. They're going to release the CSA scores again. But no, that's not it. And as you're going to explain as you go through this, we'll hopefully at the end of the webinar today, you'll have a clear understanding of what is going to be released, when it's going to be released, and how it's going to come into play.
Well, I hope we can give them an example of what it all means. I'm not sure any of us are ready to determine the final one there. But anyway, I appreciate that. So Scott's going to be involved in a little later this, and Scott suggests the information has been available. I went back to an early presentation. Yes, it was there. But I didn't look at this. I looked at the triangles and didn't look at what was called a carrier measurement over time. Over time, this is where you find this. This is that bar chart there. Why didn't I pay any attention to it? Frankly, because I didn't understand it. And everybody was focused on the alerts and the triangles. Scott, you found that with most of your people, did you not, for the same reasons?
Everybody's, the only thing that people look at was the CSA basic scores.
So I went back to this presentation that I'd done last year, and even this is where we're still showing the triangles. And then on the right below this page you see here, lo and behold, is a carrier measurement over time. This is what's shown, and this is the absolute scores. Now I'm just showing you an older thing here, again a 2-year-old, because I had to go back that far to get all this all printed here. But let's look at this. Scott accessed information now by using the motor carrier's pen, so this is where we're going here. But before we do that, let's look at actually the methodology. This is something, when in doubt, go back to the formula. And our friend Craig Leach with Carrier Software provided this today. This is the basic measurement. This is the absolute score. It's the total of the time and severity weighted applicable violations of the basic group. So you'll have the 7 basic groups, and each one of them will have this measurement, and individually here. So you'll have one for hours of service, for unsafe driving, for maintenance, for alcohol, driver fitness, and even crashes. So it'll be looking at those, every one, and the applicable violations will be the violations that are done by a level 1, 2, 3, or 6 we're looking here, I'm sorry, I need to paraphrase. We're looking here, so we pulled up exactly one of it. This is the hours of service category, Scott. I'm sorry, I should have said that earlier here. And this is what the methodology says here. So all driver inspections involving 1, 2, 3, and 6. If you remember our presentation, 3 is driver only, where we look at the drivers if he or she is qualified and their hours of service. 2 is the walk around, which is the driver looking at under 3, and then the truck looking at the top of it, which is lights and brakes and those things, and load security. Level 1 is the full inspection, and that would be where you go underneath the truck. Level 6, I said, what is that when I looked at that? So I had to go back to one of my manuals. Level 6 is enhanced NAS inspections of radioactive shipments. Scott, I have no idea what that is. When I talked to Greg Leach about this, who furnished this, he says very few have inspections in that level. Do you even know what that meant?
Yeah, the radioactive shipments are very, very few, and most of the time the ones that are movement over the highway are military type, and they're escorted, and then the state inspectors and the federal inspectors usually don't mess with it when it's out rolling anyway, so you won't see very many of those at all.
So we're still getting back to the basic 3 that we've always dealt with. Is that what we're saying, right?
Yeah, the basic 3.
So what they're taking here is when the risk gets inspected, and then you have the relevant inspections of any driver inspections here, including those that do not result in violations. So these are the things. They take the total number of violations over a period of time. We'll go and show you how to do this in a minute. And then they divide that by the number of relevant inspections. And so the relevant inspections here are not just drivers. They're anyone. They're ones with no violations. There could be one with a maintenance violation, no hours service violation, the total number. So what they're trying to come up with is when a truck gets stopped and an inspection is done, how often is that truck cited for an hours of service violation? And when they're cited for an hour of service violation, what is the severity rating for that inspection? This is what we're dealing here. Or if it's a maintenance, or if it's a driver fitness. So what we're trying to do here is when we look at a truck that's being stopped, and this is an individual method, okay? This is not a peer group, it's that individual risk. How often the truck gets stopped? That is the time waiting. We'll talk about the waiting of the time here because the most frequent ones have a higher time rating than the rest of it. We'll look at all those inspections, and then we'll look at the inspections that they had and how many of those had an hours of service violations and what was the individual inspection severity rating for those hours of service. And then that's weighted by the time weighting. As we go down here, the severity rating will be based on the chart that we're all familiar with, like hours of service. I think Scott has if you drive over 11 hours, that has a 7. Am I correct on there?
Yeah, it carries a 7 rating on weighting on it.
Right, and then if what it's supposed to be is the driver then cannot drive until they stay there for 10 hours, that's the OOS, that's the out of service violation, and then the 2 factors added to that. And then when you aggregate all of them, meaning not only hours of service, but if you have one in maintenance and stuff, any one inspection cannot have more of a severity than a 30. Have I described that correctly?
Yes, reasonably so, yes.
What you mean reasonably so?
Hey, anytime we're dealing with this, Tommy, it changes from day to day. Today, yes, tomorrow may be a different story.
Well, I understand that, but what I'm saying here, and so this is the formula here. The time waiting is, again, 1, 2, and 3. If it's within 6 months, it's multiplied times 3. If it's 6 months to 12 months, it's multiplied times 2. And if it's 1 month, over 12 months, a year, then it's multiplied by 1. And so time waiting, both of them, both the severity and the inspections are time weighted. So Scott, let's talk about an insured getting a inspection. And that inspection is for driving out of hours services over the 10 hours, and 11 hours, and let's assume they're put out of service. So that becomes a 9 if my math's correct.
Yeah, you'd have 7-point rating for the driving beyond 11 hours, And if they put them out of service, that adds 2 additional weights to it, or 2 points to it. It's easy to say points. And then that would make that 11. And since the violation is within the first 6 months, or it was a fresh violation, then you multiply it by the time weight of 3, and then that would come up to a weight of 33 for that violation.
Right, and so that's that one violation. And then what they do each month, they'll take all the violations for this month and for the previous 23 months using that same formula, where the difference is that when that one inspection goes beyond 6 months, then it's reduced from a 3 factor to a 2 factor, so that 33 then gets down, I think my math that you and I did earlier, what, a 27, is it not? Is that not what?
22, drop it to a 22.
22,
and then drops back to 11 when it ages older than a year.
Right, and so then they take all of those inspections during the 24-month period, once we have time adjustment, and they add all those together. And that becomes the numerator that we talked about in the previous thing. That is the top line here, total of time and severity weighting applicable violations. This is how they come up with a number. So they take every one of the inspections that had an hours of service violations. They take that inspections and they time weighted 3, 2, and 1. Then they add all of the hours of service violations for the 24 months, and that becomes a top line of the absolute. Correct?
Yes, sir.
And then they take the inspections, the total number of inspections, all inspections, ones with no violations, ones with a violation in every category, all of the inspections they have, but they also add that same time weighting factor based on the formula, where if the inspections were done within the last 6 months, then that will take the total number of inspections times 3, and that gives us that number. If it's, and then they do the second number of 6 to 12 months, and then over that, and then that number of the total inspections time weighting goes back to the bottom line of this formula. Total time weighted of relevant inspections. But that's all inspections. So again, we're trying to come up with what is, based on the time weighting factors, what will be the average time weighted severity for every inspection they have. And so this is the number they're trying to come up with in that area. And so this is here to note the time weighted is applicable to all relevant inspections, meaning all inspection levels 1, 2, 3, and 6. Those that do not result in a violation, and some of the, even the ones that do not result in a violation, and the basic. Those, I'm reading you the pages that we show here on page 23 and 24 is out of the FMCSA methodology for the absolute measurement. So the time and severity weighting violation is a violation severity weighted multiplied by the time. So Scott, understand you went into one of your insureds with their PIN number, right, and pulled this up?
Well, I actually went into one of my friends who allowed me to have his
apologize. I didn't mean to say insured, but this is a motor carrier who gave you permission who you work with. Okay, brother? This is what's here.
And got the PIN number, and the PIN number, of course, is assigned to each company that has a DOT number. And since the FAST Act was signed by the President back in December, these alerts and individual scores for each basic have gone away. But with the individual company's PIN, the company can still go in and look at their performance. And what it also does with their PIN and looking at it from a company standpoint, it also gives, when you want to look at the individual inspection, that lists the truck and the serial number of the truck, the driver, it lists all of that on there for the individual company to see. Even before, when these scores were public and anybody wanted to go in and look at the basic scores, and then they wanted to look at the individual inspections, it did not show the individual driver involved. So the company has the capability with their PIN to look at a lot of information and helps them manage their daily operations going on. In this particular example you're looking at on the screen, there's 2 alerts, as Tommy calls them, triangles, in the hours of service and in vehicle maintenance. Currently, to have an alert in the hours of service, their CSA basic scores, the old thing that we used to look at up until December the 4th, would have to be higher than a 65 or higher. The threshold was at a 65, and I think this particular example that I was looking at, you know, was at a 75 or 78 or something like that. So that's what pops the alert up. And then it's also showing a maintenance alert in the maintenance basic with the other triangle. And normally you get that alert when you pass the threshold of 80 in the maintenance. So different basics, as we've talked in the past, have different thresholds. Some of them at 80, some of them at 65, some of them maybe even at 60. But that's the old way we looked at it, and that's what you're looking at here.
Yeah, and for you who cannot look at this and say that doesn't look familiar now, there's one other thing here. That last column, insurance and other items, that has been added, and that is only available if you have the individual PIN number. Eventually,
Correct.
That's going to be extremely relevant to us, because what we project is going to be shown there is the current insurance on file for that motor carrier, and that's going to be important after the uniform registration system becomes effective, if the timeline is met, September 30th, 2016, when the DOT numbers, the MC numbers will go away, the DOT numbers require filing, and then the individual enforcement agencies on the highway, when they see a truck with a DOT number, will be able to pull this information up and see if they have insurance or not, and then will enforce the insurance requirements there. That's going to be real relevant here. Right now it doesn't have much meaning to us, but just to point out that today you could not see what we're seeing on this. The reason that we're able to publish this for you is because Scott has a friend. Notice we take his name off of it, Scott, without defaming him on this part of it. So we're here for relevant information purposes only, right?
Yeah, it may not be a friend if I had his name up there, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You can lose a few friendships. But I want to explain to you where you can't see this now. But what you will see, based on what they're telling us, is when you punch in go into the SMS for individual motor carriers based on DOT numbers this month, you'll see this absence of the triangle and absence of that last block. But you will see then there's carrier measurement over time. Again, when we look at this left-hand column, which still carries, which is kind of important to me on this thing, Scott, because they're still retaining that wording on the left-hand side. 75% of motor carriers in the same safety event group have better on-road performance than this motor carrier. I don't know who they're preaching that to, unless as an FMCSA officer, because the only people now that have availability of this, or should have availability of this, is people with the motor carrier themselves, or friends like yourself that give the PIN number here. But you know, that used to be a hammer that I was really concerned with if I was a shipper or if I had the court system.
Yeah, and how this comes into play a lot of times, Tommy, is this allows the individual motor carrier at any time they want to pull up and see where they're at. They have the graph that's sort of the right hand of this slide that shows.
Well, we're going to talk about that in a second. But my point is that then if my concern is I don't know why they're still showing how this one in the trucker raging when the only one to look at is that trucker. I mean, again, that's just curiosity. This didn't take that down. That was there. But the important part of here. Now, terminology, and Scott, then I want you to step in and do this here. Carrier measurement over time. That is what we're referring to as the absolute measurement. That's the raw measurement. That's that formula that we just talked about that comes up with this number. So, Scott, explain what we see here.
Well, what we're looking at is a graph that shows our absolute score, what is commonly called an carrier absolute score over a period of time. If you look to the left of the graph, you can see in August of 2015 it was a 121, and if we go to the far right of the graph, we see a date of January 29th of 2016, and what this tells us on the July 29th of 16 was that when FMCSA updated the scores in their February update, they went through pulling the information from January through January 29th for that latest update, and when they computed it, then they came up with an hours of service absolute score factor of 1.19 for this particular company's hours of service for the month of February and for 24 months back from that February.
Right. This is a 20-month 24-month period of time. And when you look at the August, which you could look at in September, again, this is when the data's put in, August 28th. It's viewed usually, what, Scott, 4 or 5 days later that we look at it, no later than a week later, then it becomes public.
Yeah, and you have the capability, if you click on this, if you look at the little top, I don't know if you can see it, top right-hand screen, there's a little box you can click on, and it will allow you to go back the entire 20, well, actually, you can go back to the beginning of CSA Basics in December of 10 and see the scores monthly.
See the trend. And so
yeah.
when you do August here, then July would have been off, and they added August to the 24 months. So it's a rolling 24 months. And so when we look at this, an important part of the 6 months here, every inspection here had a severity rating of the 3 from the time rating standard, where if you had gone back another 6 months, then obviously in those inspections that develop those would have a time rating of 2 and 1. So this is how it looks at. So it's aggressive with the far right-hand side being the most current one, and they're showing the most frequent months here that has the most time severity rating. So this is what we look at.
Yeah, and at a glance, Tommy, it just lets the company look at a quick glance, a micro shot, a microsecond of seeing how they're trending, their company's performance is trending in the past 6 months in that particular basis.
So this is the 1.19. So the question that we dealt with, and Scott and I have talked about, and I asked Scott, what the heck does 1.19 mean? I mean, you know, it's a number. And that's why we went to the triangles. But first off, this number now, so we get to where this number gets to the triangles, to the alerts. This number now is then thrown in and put in the safety event groups, which has based on number of relevant inspections for this category. If you know, remember there are 5 of those, and all motor carriers who fit in those with DOT numbers will have their scores compared to this 1.19, and that's what will exceed the 75 percentage points. This is how this number then gets related back into the alerts, is they take this number and they compare everyone in that safety event group. Do you know how many we don't know how many vehicles this year, I mean how many relevant inspections this insured had. We didn't go that far. But this is what it is. Right, this number is compared to everybody in that group, correct?
The 119 would be your basic number, and then they would take that and compare that to your peer group, and then that would give you that CSA percentile score that we have been used to seeing up until December the 4th. But what you will see when you bring this, when you hear them talking about they're going to put the scores back up, we're talking about the slide that you're looking at now, and this is what you will see. You will not see any CSA scores, any basics, or any alerts. You will see a chart or a slide as you screen up and look of a motor carrier. It looks just like what you're looking at on the screen.
Unless you have access to CAB or carrier's leads, and you can still get those the scores, the alert scores there in the peer group. This is the number one here. So we said, well, what made up this 1.19? So Scott had the data here, and on this risk, they had 593, which is the total of time and severity weighting applicable violations, meaning they took all the violations that had hours of service violations during the 24 months. They took the violations of every inspection for the 6 month period of time and added those total amounts of the aggregate by 3. Then they took the next 6 months and of the total inspection and did it time weighting 2. And then the ones that are over a year, they took those inspections and time rating of 1. Then they added them all up, and that came with a number of 593. So that's how many time-weighted severity of violations they had during this 24 months. But that says, okay, that's the total. But how many did it for each inspection? So then they took the total number of inspections, 1, 2, and 3 level, and then if the few you have 6. The total number of inspections where there was a violation given. So this is why on clean inspections, we've always said clean inspections help. And everybody says, well, how does it help? It helps because it comes into that bottom number. If it's a clean inspection with no violation, it becomes a part of this total time weighting of relevant inspections. So it helps because therefore it goes in this formula which reduces the overall average of the number of violations for each inspection. This is where the clean inspections come in and how clean inspection works. But if they can have, in this case, since they have an alert and maintenance, there are probably a lot of inspections with maintenance in it. But that inspection, if you had one with maintenance and had no hours of service, that inspection's there. Then they take all the inspections again in the previous 6 months and multiply that number by 3. They take the inspections in 3 to 6 months, and that's by 2. And they take all the inspections over a year that they have, no matter what the results of those inspections are, and then they add them all of those together, and then they divide the total inspections with the total severity time weighting for the hours of service, and that's where you come up with 1.19. Now, I'm sure everybody's confused about that, but this is where this comes up. Scott, you might want to elaborate on it.
No, I just want everybody to understand how easy it was to get to this. It's fun, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm glad that we have some background here.
Yeah, Tommy, the thing I'd say again, let me say, then I'll back out of here and let you go on from here, is
no, this is fine.
Yeah, this is what we're going to see in a week from now. If you look up a motor carrier, you will see this carrier measurement over time, and that's all you will see. You will not see the triangles, the alerts of the basics that we've been used to, that we saw prior or up until December the 4th of 15. So when you hear people talking and the press talking and everybody buzzing about they're going to put the CSA scores back up, they are putting the absolute scores up, and this is what you'll see. Okay, Tommy?
And Scott, I think you'll agree. This is the individual measurement here. So what we're saying here is this is how many violations they got for every time their vehicle's inspected in the hours of service, and then it's time weighted where the most relevant inspections and the most relevant severity ratings end up hurting the most part in a time set factor.
Yeah.
So this gives us whatever that measure. Now, how it means compare, because this is absolute. We don't know, but later we're going to find this out. We'll talk a bit more about it. There's some other data. Scott reached out to Bob Abbott with American Trucking Association, who has also spoke at our annual conference. He's a good friend of Scott, and he sent us the formula that later we're going to talk about here today in the safety finish determination, where they're going to take this and come up with an absolute threshold that says this trucker exceeds that. Is that not what the eventual use will be in the safety finish determination?
Yeah, that's what they're going to use, and a lot of people already know that they have come out and said they are going to issue a safety fitness determination rule. And we'll explain that as we get to the tail end of this thing, Tommy.
Right. I reached out to CAB and Carrier Software to see how they showed this, and they came back in response to us. National Audit Bureau said the facts that SMS will be restoring the public release of the measure changes very little in terms of analysis of the risk that they're doing for an underwriter, is their thought. Even when the measure were previously public, CAB determined that including these scores on the CAB report added little value to the clients and would in fact lead to confusion on the part of any underwriter. And I don't disagree with that. As Scott and I tried to share with you, if you listened so far, you still might be confused, especially considering that few insurance companies have factored the standalone measure into their ratings. And again, we looked at the triangles and we looked at the alerts and not the detail. This is what we have done. For example, it's possible for two motor carriers to have the same measure but completely different scores due to what? The peer group classification, like we'll talk about, afforded to any individual motor carrier. In other words, some measures different basics. We concluded that the scores and inspection detail are the better scores of the information for an educational assessment of the risk. We continue to make the measure available through our data service for use in analysis by underwriters. While safety finish determination does take the raw measurement into account, that's a proposed rule, over the SMS public scores. It is with very distinction in terms of data and sufficiency and peer grouping, and as the the safety fitness determination is still under proposal. Adding the measure would introduce only confusion at this point. That's CAB's report. Carrier Software reached out to Greg Lee, and he has a little different. We currently have the CSA SMS measurement on their analysis because these values do not relate on a safety event group, do not rely on a safety group of figuring. The SMS measures are more accurate than the percentage scores for individual risk. Now, the difference here is Carrier Software does a lot of analysis on behalf of motor carriers, where CAB's concern is the insurance interpretation of this. So they have different marketplaces as their core business. And this, when they spoke with insurance carriers, I have been telling them, this is Greg Leach saying, that the SMS measurement is a better parameter to consider because it is more objective, meaning that individual motor carriers. If you track the SMS measure from 1 month to the next, you can see exactly how the performance of that motor carrier is changing, independent of what the rest of the industry is doing. Scott, you more or less buy into this statement, do you not?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that. Now, what I've asked Greg to do since he came back from this, since he sent me this, and this information we hope to be able to provide you very soon in a blog, because I have no idea what the 1.19 we show has to do with any other stuff. But we will be able to provide with you very shortly analysis done by Carrier Software, where he will, my challenge to him is, he's going in his database and look at that the 5 safety event groups, meaning by numbers. He's going to look by numbers of power units, and he's going to look at every one with an MC number. Now, again, Scott reminds me we're leaving some private carriers out of it. We're leaving some exempt haulers out of it. But when I say, and the reason I want to point Scott, you can talk briefly, I don't mind your input on this. If we look at people with MC groups, those are typical people with 18-wheelers. If we look at everybody DOT number, we've got a lot of people, some of them even don't have to have hours of service because they're within the 100-mile radius. And so when I look at our core business and try to get a benchmark that the average has, I thought by looking at people with MC numbers, which would be people typically with 18-wheelers, would be more reflective of the market that we typically insure. Do you agree with that, or you want to?
Yeah, generally I think that's a true statement, Tommy.
Yeah, I mean, all we're trying to do is get a benchmark for this. And
right.
So what he's going to show us is what the average basic score is of all motor carriers with MC numbers based on number of power units. And that will just tell us what the average is. And as individual underwriters look at it, or individual retail agents, you can see if you're individually insured, when you start looking at this, what this 1.19 means, how it meets within the average. So we can get some measurement of what's here. What we have to start contemplating when we look at every individual risk is this a particular crashes? Is this something we want to look at to start building into it? Because this money is available, and this is not involved in peer groups. So this is what that Craig at Carrier Software will provide us, that I'll be able to provide you. He just takes time sometimes, as you can imagine, to run those numbers. So we hope to have it for you before the week's out or shortly the week after. Don't you think that, Scott, that might be helpful for us at least to start understanding this better?
Yeah, it will. It's clear as mud, Tommy.
Well, whatever we have to do. And he also pointed out, Greg pointed out in this thing, is that the scores, the 1.19, is low for hours of service. But if you go look at the basic group, and we did not do that, maintenance, those scores run in the 8 or 9 level, not the 1 and 2 level.
That could be. We're just looking at the 1 hours of service today, but if we, as you just said, if we look at maintenance, we may see that those numbers would come up to a 7 or an 8 or 8.9 of that or so. So the different basics will vary in the absolute scores, and as these scores pop back up, you'll have an opportunity to see the variance among the basics.
This is all new. We haven't looked at it, but basically to summarize, and I'm going to ask Scott to put his 2 cents in the end. When we look at that 1.1 number, that says when my insurer's truck stopped, they were inspected for hours of service, and for every time that truck was inspected, they had a severity rating of 1.19 for all those inspections, with the factor added to it. The most frequent inspections have a higher rating than the lower ones, and that's a 12-month average. I know that statement's kind of unclear, but basically that's what it's showing, is it not, Scott?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right, we hear that. So the absolute measurement score to return to the public SMA, well, the next update, this was put in the Overdrive magazine. Carrier's so-called absolute score in individual basic category will be returned to the SMS public web view with the February update. In March, Carriers, this is from the FMCSA, this is the thing, absolute measure will be returned to the website. The absolute measure presents a time and severity weighting calculations of Carrier's violation performance in each basic. The higher the number per CSA SMF methodology, the worse the performance. CSA scores are the percentage range Carriers received in each basic and are directly based on comparing the absolute measurement among the groups of carriers, like we talked about earlier. You might think of the absolute measure as a violation performance grade before the curve is applied. So this is the individual answer to the test before they put it into the bell curve, is what they're saying. Through the FAST Act, Highway Bill required the percentage and the evaluation basic alerts to be removed from the public view. The bill specifically allowed for the retentions of the absolute measurement in the SMC public. While such measurements may ultimately be less problematic for carriers than the comparative percentage rating, the jury's out on whether these numbers may ultimately become safety evaluation standards in and of themselves. This is the different view that CAB has versus carriers lead. But the real reason I point this out is to remind you that the recent release of the safety fitness determination, which is in the process now of a potential rulemaking, and is out there now for input, will be based on these scores. And so that's the relevant part of this, and that's the future to come. So the alert triangle based on safety events, peer comparison. So what is meant by the absolute measurement? And Scott, you just went this. We could not say it in English, could we not? There's no way we could say the English part of it. So, you know, that's the thing. And then but then we also remind you that the published now says is shippers, brokers, property brokers, don't worry about this, because what we're saying to the government is, as long as they're not rated unsatisfactory, they have ability to operate on the highway. And so that's still the key here. But that unsatisfactory rating is based on the current safety fitness determination, which takes an on-site review. And this is what's moving now to the proposed safety fitness determination in the future. And so this is the same information that will be here is for the safety fitness determination. This is where the currently satisfactory condition, unsatisfactory, unrated are based on individual reviews. The FMCA has said the new safety fitness determination will be published by the end of this year, which has been done, and it's promised to be based by the end of this year, because now they're taking the rulemaking. You think they're going to compete by the end of this year to have the absolute rule out?
I think they're going to try to do that. There is some confusion or some thoughts that they can't really come out with a complete safety fitness determination rule or put it into effect, because there's some parts of the FAST Act that complicate that. So that's what's going to be determined. That's why they put out a notice of proposed rulemaking in January on the safety fitness determination, and then it's in a 60-day comment period, and they're going to reevaluate and see what that comes, and see if any legal action or something has been filed on, and then they'll move forward once they do that.
Yeah, the way I read it is 60 days they're going for input, then they're going to be 30 days to answer the individual input, and then they're going to study here. CCJ Digest, again, I recommend you going in there, you go and look at their past blogs, pointed this out that it might be unfair and the proposal might violate FAST Act based on what Scott just said, but they're moving towards it. And Scott, you know, when I think about all this time frame of what you just said, and I taught this class recently, you're talking about this study has to be done in 18 months. It's going to come close to 18 months before they sort all this final rule out.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
these two things might be coming together about the same time. So when the final report out that will show the viability, or at least some correct of any viability of these being an absolute measurement of safety, the final rule might be here. So I think that's also a part of their thinking, is they can't wait for that report to be over before they publish a safety finish determination, because then that would push it back another year or so. So I think that might be some of their thought process.
I think the thought process was, let's go ahead and put the proposed notice of a safety fitness determination out there, and at least we can be working towards a final rule. And then if the report kicks that they come out with in 18 months of December 4th of 15 shows light and changes things, and they can back up and change those individual items that might be addressed, but at least they'll be moving forward with their safety fitness determination.
Yeah, and the new rule is going to have, and again, if you read the article, and for sake of time, we're going, there'll be one category, unfit, period. There'll not be any unrated, there won't be any conditional, unsatisfactory, it will be unfit. And the public said that it's going to affect about 300 motor carriers. Now, there are 580 some odd thousand motor carriers with DOT numbers. You know, there are 206,000 or so with MC numbers for hire. If it only affects about 300 motor carriers each year, Scott, I don't think that's a big number. I don't know what you think. Now, if it's my individual risk, it would scare me. If that's the risk I'm insuring, it would scare me. But that is
I think when all this thing is put together, you may be talking anywhere from 300 to 500 motor carriers in the country that will be affected by the safety fitness determination, or at least would put them as unfit and put them down from operating if they couldn't improve their activity within a short period of time.
Yeah, and the scary part about it from the insurance standpoint is we don't know which one of those might be, and dealing with the methodology and the individual scores, getting back to what we just looked at, which is important to control, it changes monthly. So that's going to be the key to that. And so to that end, we need to worry about this part of it. And again, the CSA stuff. So FMCA moving ahead, absolute measurement based on the proposed safety fitness. The rating changes monthly. Maybe the publication of absolute measurement might not be a big deal, but the safety fitness determination will, because you'll have unrated. This is where I suggest for you, and you all can copy this, if you're an insurance provider, I suggest that you start including on your application some wording similar to this. And the last paragraph is important here. I recognize that all or part of my operations are under the Department of Transportation oversight, requiring me to adhere to their rules and regulations. I acknowledge that DOT rules and regulations are understood by me, and I will adhere to the rules and regulations, including but not limited to driver hiring, vehicles inspections, maintenance, and hours of service. The reason I think that's going to be important to start including in applications is when you find out your insured now is unfit, and it's midterm, how are you going to get off the risk? You can't argue material change in exposure, but you might have some states that say, well, it's really not a material change in exposure because they had these scores earlier, or you should have looked at it earlier. But with this wording here, my thought process, and please clear it with all your compliance people, lawyers and all, this will at least give us ability to get off the risk midterm, still having to give the 36-day notice because the MC is 90, but it will give us off the risk if they don't stay within the regulations. Scott, I know you don't have much opinion about that, but I think we need to start thinking about that, because we're going to look at midterm, and your insurance is going to be shown unfit, and I'm worried about what will happen if a crash happens now and they're unfit. How are we going to pay out that crash?
Yeah, I understand, but it doesn't change really what the motor carrier should be doing all along anyway, and that is monitoring their performance. And when they do see a slide to the negative side, they drill down to the core values and see what's causing that, and then they correct that, and then they can show a correction, and they're getting things back in order, and then hopefully they'll never get to the point where they'll get that unfit.
Yeah, and this is where we're talking about for the agents to help with the scores here with the safety, because the scores you have now will go into safety fitness determination. Even if it's published a year from now, the inspections you have today for the motor carrier needs to understand will be a part of this final thing, because it looks back 2 years. So the retail agent needs to talk about that. Time-wise, just real quickly, this beyond compliance. Do you know how much anything about this is? This is going to be the super motor carrier who's doing everything right, correctly on this part?
Well, Yeah, where that's at right now, Tommy, is that there have been some talking from some carriers who invest in the technology, who have good safety scores and everything. Well, what incentive is there for me, or what will the feds do for me since I'm doing everything right and I got a good record and all this kind of stuff, if there's something out there? Officially on the books today, there's nothing. There's only talk about what may happen in beyond compliance. But the hope is, and the theory behind this is, if carriers are willing to do things above and beyond the normal call of duty, then should there be some kind of rewards for them to do that? And it's only in the discussion. There's not been a proposed rule. There's only been discussions, and more to come on that sometime soon, I'm sure.
One of the reasons I'm going to point this out is talks there about tools and technology motor carriers are using. Our annual conference in September 29th and 30th in Orlando, Florida, and Truckers 2 CIC, we're going to look at this technology and these tools. We're going to come up and talk about how these things can be adopted by the motor carrier, return on investment, the tools there, what's the legal ramifications, because we're going to have both the providers of this technology and lawyers to talk about how to use it. So we will look in depth on what your insurer can do to maybe become a part of this compliance if and when it ever comes forward. We also will have the crash accountability study that's done by ATRA. Dan Murray will be with us because they've done a study that says if you take out some unavoidable accidents, what that will change in the crash basic. And so the FMCSA and the FAST Act requires FMCSA to look at this accountability, because all crashes now have no causation factors to it. Again, we'll have Dan Murray at the annual conference talking about that part.
Tommy, there's been some discussion of the accountability and preliminary things from FMCSA said they don't have the funds or the time to go in and look at DOT reportable accidents and to determine if they were preventable or non-preventable. So this is going to be a subject that's going to be discussed. Now, what normally happens is if a compliance review is performed on the motor carrier, that motor carrier should have each accident, each DOT reportable accident that they have on record already determined whether it was preventable or non-preventable on the part of their driver. And if it was non-preventable on the part of their driver, then they need to argue or talk about that in that compliance review and get them to take that out of the count on the frequency rate per million miles. So that's a big deal. This right. Accountability of crashes is going to be a big thing as we move forward.
Right, and if you remember the American Transportation Research ATRA study that Dan Murray will talk about, kind of shows how those, if you take them out, they did some calculations how that would change that basis. I mentioned the hair testing is going to be a proposal. We're going to spend again a breakout session, annual conference, talk about drug testing. Both, and we had a question here is that one motor carrier had one of their drivers tested, but they had them tested the wrong location because the person who tested wasn't qualified at FMCS level, and therefore they were fined anyway. Plus, you got the drug clearinghouse that's coming up that's going to be proposed in the next couple months. And now you also have the hair testing. We're going to spend, again, a session with experts in the drug testing part at the annual conference there. And also the commercial driver license pilot program coupled with the new, just published this week, driver training programs will be looked at. The point I'm making here is that we're trying to stay ahead in the annual conference for all these things that are involved in the FAST Act. And Scott's going to be with us there to help us talk about some of these kind of things. To that end, plan to attend our annual conference. Again, it's September 29th and 30th in Orlando, Florida. It does qualify for CIC update credits if you're a CIC and Truckers 2. We welcome there. There'll be more attorneys, enforcement officers and all to dig into this stuff in more depth. And Scott, I think you agree with me. 6 months from now, we'll probably know more about a lot of these things.
Absolutely. And let me close. Let me just make one final comment, if I can, Tommy. Is everything that we talked about and confused about the safety fitness determination numbers is they are going to release them. It will be the absolute scores. It will not be the CSA normal scores with the score percentages. It will not be that. So I don't think at this point there's anything to get real excited about. Other as we deal with our customers, we want to encourage them to do everything they can to improve their record.
Right, and the point I wanted to bring this stuff out is so now that it's available, I wanted them at least to have some understanding, because I didn't until we dug into this, exactly what this means. And Scott, thank you, my friend. You're a very valuable resource. I appreciate you making yourself available and your company making yourself available to members of the Motor Carriers Insurance Education Foundation to share your knowledge and answer my questions. We thank you very much. We will have some more information next month, April 14th. I haven't got the subject yet, at 2 p.m. At the truck stop. We're planning right now a couple things that we're going to talk about. One on the hot button is there's new IFTA requirements, and Scott, I don't know if you know about that, but we'll dig into some IFTAs. You all have a good week and a good month. We'll talk to you next month this time. Thank you very much. Again, thanks, Scott.
Sure thing, Tommy. Thank you.